Okay, let's finish Welcome to the Future. I don't really want this to expand past 2 parts, I think. So let's beat this game. And to do that, we're going to use a walkthrough. I think it will make for a much more entertaining video if I'm not slowly mapping out the underworld in real time. And anyway, in my defense, when I played this game for the first time in the 90s, I don't think there was a walkthrough. In any case, if there was, I didn't use one. I actually did map it out. It actually took me quite a long time. Well, not like a long time, but it took me like 5 minutes of thinking or something when I was 13 to figure out that is the reflection of the window behind you in the elevator. Strange thing. But it is sort of notable, I think, because it sets up this whole kind of reflection chamber idea that then becomes this major aesthetic through line in the underworld. It's designed this way partly, I would assume, for kind of data memory convenience and also ease of sort of programming and organization. You just have this one room with these, 4 nodes. And then graphically, this is the same for every single position in this giant maze. And so all you have to do is animate the corridors in between. But it also has the effect of creating an underworld that is very explicitly a network, which makes me think very much about the structure of brains. It's interesting that the metaphor in this underworld is so technological, I find that quite fascinating. It's this world that gives the appearance of being very organic, but then on the interior, it's this strange kind of futuristic quantum technology kind of idea. One that's connected, however, also to the idea of alien technology, which puts us back, I think, very strongly into a kind of predictable, unconscious fantasy space to do with the others and their magical technologies. That's a very, in my view, archetypal kind of idea. If it's not an anti-grav ray, it's a staff of power, but it's all in the same space. On the other hand, the fact that this is branded maybe US military kind of implies to me that perhaps these are like little outposts that have been established in a space that otherwise would have been just the sort of continuous psychedelic irreality of all these bizarre corridors that we see. I wonder exactly what the guys had in mind about all that, but anyway, turn left and then go forward, move down to the next passage, okay? Left and forward. Move forward into the next pod, then turn left and move forward to climb the stairs right to the control panel. Oh, right, this room. Look at this, go I find direction. That's a fragment of a lyric from the song No Turning Back. Click on the right button to activate the water bridge, because you will need it later. I see. And this one is going to tell me to seek the signs. Right. It's interesting that right away we're looking at another kind of twofer. It's a lot of like doubles. The whole idea of mirrors and all this down here. Turn left or right once or turn around. Maybe it would be better for the viewers if I don't narrate out these steps. I'll try to just read silently. I wish I had just a condensed list of directions instead of having to kind of read through all this text over here. The walkthrough describes this as a huge leather-looking passage. I concur, it is leathery, i.e. kind of skin-like. That's a strange tunnel there. Okay, so here we are at this interesting water bridge. It says magnetics there or something like that. Just kind of big cat idea. Okay, back in the control room. Now we can use this one. Now we're just in the woods, and you hear kind of the sounds of the animals and the trees. It is like we're moving through different kind of hollow environments. It's interesting because it's just so close to the actual game, which is just this virtual environment. But then sort of within the fiction of the world it presents, it imagines this underworld that seems to be kind of holographically constructed in some kind of way. And see, now those are like the trees, but now they're just like cylinders. So it's kind of, instead of having simulated animals, or the impression of simulated animals, the implication of them, let's say, we have just these orbs that float and make little magnetic sounds as you whiz past them. So it is like we're looking at a more deconstructed version of the scene we were just in. First we go through the woods, and then we have the woods as three-dimensional primitives. And then things like this are just completely tripped out. It's like some kind of weird brick walkway with like a force field around it, or who knows why. That one looks very 1980s to me. Now, this is funny. The walkthrough just says, you will find yourself facing a purple art piece with a weird bug on it. It's a very excellent description of it. This is actually one of my favorite pieces in the game. It has a weird kind of Hieronymus Bosch kind of quality, but filtered through this 90s Photoshop aesthetic. I adore it. So I think here this piece of art functions as a portal. Aha! Now we're in this strange space. This is some kind of like hub or nexus. Okay, this says move forward 4 times. 1, 2, 3. Look how cool this is. It's just so much eye candy all the time. You know, it needs it, of course, to make up for how kind of, let's say, empty the central gameplay mechanic is at this stage of it. You really just are sort of clicking through these different nodes in a big maze. But by giving you all this nice visual complexity to look at as you do that, it sort of puts me in an interesting kind of mood always. Why I like the game, I guess. Clicking on the Pharaoh, i.e. on Tut. And there really is support for him being called Tut, because that's what all the actual game files of him are labeled here. Take a moment to appreciate the glory of the Welcome to the Future file structure. I'm actually going to look at the Mac version because that's just the one I happen to have built in here, but this was back in the days when it was feasible to just have a bunch of completely sort of open files like this. Like, this is how I was able to create this version. Is, all the assets are just there in editable formats. So, well, here to prove my point, tut umorph. Aha, see? All of tut's hints are labeled as tut01, tut02, etc. So,
you are not prepared for the voyage.
it's the best one.
First note of final light.
Tut is one of my just very most favorite aspects of this game, really. I'm pretty sure it's just Lyle Angle through some kind of crazy vocoding process. Okay, we're going to go down the other elevator now, it looks like. And again, it's like we have sort of two elevators or two maze systems that then maybe are interconnected by that nexus in the middle. I'm not sure exactly how that works, but in terms of sort of the game space. But in the metaphor space, I would say we're definitely dealing with hemispheric imagery. Not only all this sort of mirror notions going on down here, and the fact that the maze resembles a kind of nodal, neuronal type of network in its structure, but also in the fact that it's bifurcated into these two elevator systems. That are color-coded. So the other one was yellow, and this one is red or orange. Aha. This is one of my favorite symbols in the game. It's another one that we'll see in that vision sequence later. We'll see a higher res version of it. It's titled Farman. So that's the Farman, I guess. His triangular head. And definitely achieving some kind of a balance, right? Back through my favorite room. Sorry, I don't have very much to say. I'm just kind of following the walkthrough and enjoying the chamber here. Yeah, it's like this insane flame chamber. I like this one a lot too. So much of this is so elemental. It's like that water area, and now we have this fiery passageway. I love this one. Ah, I think we're going to gain the one of the lenses. So, when we get the other two, we'll combine all three of them together. That's kind of that's the main puzzle that will then give us the final voyage letter. Although we didn't collect all the other letters. I'll have to go do that eventually in the overworld again. So we'll use that yellow key-like sign up there, I suppose. And I love this. We're kind of like momentarily back out in the overworld. It's neat. It gives you this little peek back into the other side of the game's reality. You see how the lenses are beginning to stack over there. It says blue sky very lightly on the rocks there. So I don't know, it really is imagined as kind of just literal passageways inside of this mountain. I love that it's such a pure fantasy in that way.
Find the lenses, collect the light in my tomb, reach the key to the voyage.
Find the lenses, collect the light in my tomb, reach the key to the voyage. I love that it's this chrome like hollow LP idea. So great. The walkthrough refers to this one as the shark room. It does kind of look like shark teeth or something over there. This walkthrough cracks me up. Click on the genetic disc in all caps. All that delicious Cinepack compression. Really, I love it somehow. It adds to the charm of the thing, in my opinion. Oh, that's right. We need the lens holder as well. That's so great, the way it rotates kind of slightly off axis, and that wobble. Hold on, I want to experience it again. Perfect. And then Adobe morphs out of existence. I love it. Oh, that's right. There's like a whole other section of the maze. That one looked like a shower stall or like a public pool or something. Ah, here's Tut's tomb. So cool. What happened to the music there? It's funny. Sometimes it gets like a weird bum note. I'm not sure if I remember that from running this on actual DOS hardware back in the day. By which I mean a real sound blaster. So we've returned to this central room, but now we're on an edge that will lead us to the center. This whole area is one giant mandala, and this is where we receive what's meant to be the final piece of the voyage sequence. So I find it notable that that's occurring in basically in the center of the mandala, in some sense in the center of the maze. I guess you just had to click on the lowest tone there. Wonder if that has some significance, perhaps. Well, so, okay. Even with the walkthrough, it's a bit of a trial, Mapping it out by hand was definitely, we spent some hours down there in the underground. My friend, Evan McElbride, and I, we played this game together when we were lads. Okay, now what we have to do is collect the rest of these pieces and experience the rest of the art. I happen to know that there's an A down here somewhere. Somewhere along here, and this is why it pays in these old point and clicks to always check the side nodes. Okay, it must be further up. I didn't go far up enough. There's the A. All right, you guys, we're almost ready for the voyage. Actually, the only thing we have to do before the voyage is watch the Welcome to the Future vision sequence, which will give us the O. Now, this is also the sequence that I think might contain this little precognitive trace. I say trace because I perceive it more or less that way. I think it's a small one. I say that in comparison to just other strange things I've seen in that direction. In the film analysis, primarily, that we do on this channel. Moving through something almost vaginal or womb-like here. And, okay, we're about to start the big sort of central vision sequence of the game, I suppose. Now, last time I talked about the Red Book. Should we talk about this time? Maybe I'll talk a bit. Maybe I'll talk a bit about the alchemists and what Jung's ideas were about all that. The alchemists were attempting to explain the mystery of nature. But the nature of the material world is such a profound question mark to them, and such an unsolvable sort of question mark at that time. How to make any headway at all was sort of the problem. That they ended up explaining not so much the mechanisms of the material world, but projecting into that nebulous problem space a whole bunch of interesting psychological structures. And so that was Jung's view. His idea about the alchemists and about the material that the alchemists left was that they were accidental maps of the unconscious. You see how it relates to this idea in Welcome to the Future of the travelers that left the essence of their thought in vision, but who knows how to interpret it? It requires something hermeneutic. But that's quite in keeping with these basic ideas about the projective carnival of the alchemists. Now, you see, the thing about it all is that I don't imagine that Jung could have imagined the situation we're in today vis-a-vis the potency of our media tools. The alchemists were going about their projective, accidental, active imagination with comparatively primitive artistic channels of expression. Something like this, where you can render an entire world and generate so much art so quickly. It really is a different world. So there's that tremendous piece there. Running Dog. I believe, it says they're Matt G. So those are the creations of Matt Green. His style is very recognizable in this, and I have to say, his pieces are really some of my favorite. I love that weird kind of 80s vapor abstraction look to his pieces. So anyway, cycling back around to alchemy, what can we say, therefore, about alchemy, generally speaking? For instance, to the question, what is alchemy, finally? Well, this kind of... First of all, we should distinguish. There are a few kinds of alchemy, of course. Partly that was born out of historical necessity. The alchemists were just some people, like other people, that needed to pay their bills at the end of the day, and so they came up with various schemes in order to do that. A lot of them were quite accomplished artists, of course. They made these books that often were illustrated and so on. It's really quite an interesting connection to this game, because the alchemists were, in many respects, multimedia artists. In general, shamanism is like that. It evolved out of probably shadow puppetry and so on around the fire. You'd have, you'd cook food around the fire, and then you'd all sit and eat the food, and then have myth enacted in the form of dance and also with shadows generated by the fire, and probably then the medicine man or so on would tell you some interesting things, and that would be like an evening. Perhaps it ended, depending on the culture and the era of time, in some kind of an orgiastic exchange. This is the original context for what we call multimedia, which is to say art forms played out in real time involving all of the senses. It's an attempt to fill the phenomenological theater, in a sense, completely, so as to create something immersive. The alchemists used their artistic skills commercially in order to make money. That was one of the things they did. And they also used the material, sort of experimental and proto-scientific aspects of their practice to generate money on this sort of quest to produce gold from lead. In the end, a symbolic, spiritual idea, but one that the alchemists, many alchemists in any case, were certainly not above exploiting with a bit of theater, probably, in order to survive, so that they could continue to do the real work. I can't be too critical of my brothers in history, because I'm just the same way. My practice is video alchemy and multimedia alchemy, just like these Welcome to the Future guys. And to survive, I cut video for corporations sometimes, and this is the nature of the real world. We all have to put bread on the table somehow. So anyway, the spiritual or psychological aspects of the work are, of course, less remembered. And in fact, those aspects of the work were probably quasi-unconscious for the most part. It's not completely unconscious. I think many alchemists were quite aware, and some were maybe even fully aware. But the first major realization of the alchemical project consciously, that happens with Jung. And in my opinion, you can't really understand Jung unless you understand him in the context of alchemy. He is the greatest and, in a sense, the last alchemist, because with him something really changes. No, I don't really mean he's the last alchemist. I consider myself an alchemist. I know many other alchemists who are working and trying to extend this field, if we can call it that, in various ways, with varying levels of success, I should say. I just mean that he is an alchemist who draws a line in the tradition. There's alchemy before Jung, and then there's alchemy after Jung. And so this is what we're witnessing here is, in my opinion, some real alchemy, and some alchemy that was achieved after Jung. How consciously it was achieved, I don't know. I think, again, it was, obviously quasi-conscious, because it comes through in the whole narrative structure that we're given in the game. It just tells us explicitly it's a voyage of spiritual growth, and Tut is going to be your guide, and you're gonna collect symbols and have some kind of a psychedelic experience. So it knows what it is in the basic way, which makes it basically self-aware alchemy, which makes it basically post-Jungian alchemy, is what I would say about it, I guess, in the end. This unicorn. It's some of these are so goofy, but I just can't help but love every single one, because they're objective fantasy. So anyway, you see, I really buy it when this CD-ROM tells me that it's welcoming me to the future. I think so. I think that, again, because of the technological accelerants currently operating on our creativity collectively, we are all becoming alchemists rather in this mold, whether we like it or not. It really has quite a lot to do with the fact that we are increasingly filming ourselves, talking, doing the kinds of stuff we're doing on this YouTube channel. It's not unusual anymore to have a YouTube channel. This is just one channel in a giant bajillion verse of channels that are all more or less doing the same thing. I don't really draw a division between what I'm doing here and what anyone else is doing on YouTube. We're all exploring our identities, actually, and exploring our understanding of ourselves and of the world in one way or another. That's always the underlying context, I would say, to any kind of large-scale creative project, and or small-scale creative project, but, you know, as the one scales, so does the other, right? The interesting thing about YouTube is that it's so directly geared into the, you know, YouTube and things like it and whatever might replace it and so on. It's so geared into the self-image. Perfectly timed with this nice mandala here. But it's so geared into the self-image because it's literally a video avatar, a kind of video ghost of yourself. I really think it marks a fairly profound shift in the way we think about ourselves. I mean, it just must. It's quite a thing to view yourself from the outside with that degree of resolution and fidelity. And I don't just mean clarity of picture. But that's something we could kind of think about evolving through history as well, by the way. In early history, people would look in water, bodies of water, and see reflections of themselves, and that was about the best you would have. And so the association between the unconscious as a reflection of consciousness, as a mirrored version of consciousness, with water, which is something that shows your reflection but then has depths in it that contain maybe creatures in it that might be autonomous. You see how these metaphors are perfectly emergent and kind of couldn't have happened any other way given the structure of the human being and the structure of its environment. But so that basic reflectivity is so embodied, I think, in the YouTube experience. You're editing an image of yourself, a model of yourself. And as you edit yourself, virtually, you are in some sense editing yourself literally, just to say psychologically, because you are gaining self-awareness. But the very gaining of that awareness changes the situation. There's an interesting thing. Jung talks about a new temple in which every individual will be a pillar. It relates to this idea that in order to save the world, we all have to do our own inner work. It's basically Michael Jackson, Man in the Mirror. It has to start with you. You have to be the one to take the voyage, stepping now into the language of this particular alchemical piece. In so doing, you become the whole human being, or you approximate it more and more, hopefully, and become one of the shared foundations. This is Jung's vision. I think maybe what Jung was imagining was YouTube. Okay, back in kind of CD-ROM mandalas again, you know? So, I hope everyone enjoyed. Now let's look at some of these pictures and talk about them. What do we have here but sort of a extremely archetypal situation, two levitating orbs and kind of a door to the infinite in the middle. It's almost like a Masonic tracing board sort of concept. But it's no surprise to see things like that. They've titled it The Bridge. Now, what I mean by this is that it's not surprising to see, not because I think these guys were consciously attempting to replicate a Masonic sort of image here. It's that both the Masonic tracing board and this image come out of some sort of unconscious idea about the nature of our nature. This is some kind of an idea about balancing the hemispheres. This is a huge topic that I don't have the stamina to go into at the moment. But there's a very interesting book that people should read if they're interested in this kind of stuff by a guy named Ian McGilchrist. I think that's how you say his name. It's called The Master and His Emissary. And it's all about the nature of the hemispheres. It's extremely excellent. I'm reading it now and finding it just completely fascinating. At some point, I want to make a longer video maybe about that whole topic, particularly how I see it informing the model, really improving and changing the model that I was playing around with in that paradigm and meta-paradigm video. But for now, I'll just say about the hemispheres that the big distinction that McGilchrist paints is between two types of attention. You have narrow, focused attention, which is the domain of the left hemisphere. And then you have a kind of open, vigilant attention, which is the domain of the right hemisphere. And it essentially tracks the problem of how do you eat and exist in an environment in which predators are trying to eat you. You have to do two things at once. You have to both execute all of the sort of action sequences and little heuristic things that are going to lead you towards the food that you know you need to eat. And so that's left hemisphere clicking away in the end. Nature seems to solve this. It just creates two subsystems. So the one does that, and then what the other one does, it pays attention to to everything else, to the environmental situation, the context, and it's just looking for anything else that might be interesting, helpful, but really primarily it's looking for something that might harm you, probably. So that it can alert you in the case of a predator or some other imminent disaster that requires a shift in focus, fundamentally. That's kind of the origin, if you like, of the hemispheres. And as they grow and develop, they through the sort of the evolutionary story, they begin to specialize further, but always in ways that seem to track this basic sort of difference between focused attentional grasping and sort of defocused, contextual, holistic, open understanding, something like that. And so I think that the psyche on some level knows this about itself and so can communicate that to you in the form of these images that well, that really is quite correct, that they might send you in a visionary state, or in a dream, or maybe in the midst of a particularly potent cannabis trip that has thinned the veil somehow, particularly if it's in the context of art making. We're also producing images. I find this quite interesting because again, we have the idea of 3 steps that then leads you towards a kind of a singularity that forms a threshold sort of beyond a wall into a cosmos area, and then framed by this idea of balance. I would say of hemispheric balance. It's not the first time that 3 appears in this game. It's all over the place. The 3 lenses, just the general emphasis on triangles. I find this very, very interesting. They're archetypal, so there's a numinosity on these things, but there's a particular kind of numinosity on the triangle. There is, in fact, a persistent ambiguity in what we imagine to exist at the center of the mandala. Often it's 4, but sometimes it's 3. You do see classical like mandalas from antiquity that have some sort of a trinity in the center. This is one of those interesting images that it expresses duality as a trinity, because it shows you a balancing point in the middle, and that's what forms the 3. Gregory Bateson wrote a book called Ecology of Mind, in which he describes something called the levels of learning, which is based on Russell's theory of logical types. But suffice it to say that he refers to something called level 3 learning, which is a kind of third order context of learning, in which it says more or less explicitly, personality transformation takes place. It's clear that he has in mind individuation. Bateson was familiar with Jungian ideas and mentions this sort of level 3 learning phenomenon as something commonly associated with mystical states and so on. So this image maybe grabs a little bit of that with these kind of 3 steps leading up into... Well, because the other thing that Bateson says about it is that the contraries that manifest on level 2, in other words, paradoxes that emerge in the habits that we form, those contraries can only be resolved or reconciled by transitioning into level 3. And it's sort of what we get here. I think the implication here, right, is that these orbs here are black and white, but this orb is in color. So the black and white contraries that exist at level 2 get unified into a color orb at level 3. There's a whole dialectical process conveyed in this image. So you see, it's not necessary that the creator, the ego creator of the image, be aware of the archetypal structures that are being interleaved into their artwork. It just happens unconsciously, or that would be the idea anyway. So I see things like this. I say, okay, there's there's evidence that an archetypal layer of image structure was being accessed in this creative project. We might as well put a caduceus there. It's modeling the same funny, weird thing about opposite reconciliation at levels of a kind of meta levels of context in some way. So neat. That's a cool one. Let's see, Waiting for the Sky. Now here's an interesting one that actually speaks to what I was mentioning before, right? This can't make up its mind about whether to place a 4 or a 3 in the center of the mandala. You see, it's quite a proper mandala because it's also trying to convey to you that it levitates. There's something anti-gravitational or miraculous, or let's say non-local, atemporal about it, or metatemporal, or who knows how to conceptualize this thing. But this is such a pure mandala image. Jung would identify this right away. He would say, yes, this is someone engaged in the individuation process. They're producing spontaneous mandalas. My God, that really means we're in the thick of it. Now this one's interesting because it doesn't actually appear in the progression that we get set to music. It just appears here solo. So it's just another mandala, and this makes the connection between the mandala and the flying saucer also so explicit. I haven't actually read Jung's book on UFOs. It's insane that he wrote a book on UFOs. And I've read like parts of it. I've kind of started it a number of times and I always get distracted. Finish it one of these days. 'Cause I'm sure he has many enlightening things to say about it. But I love the text here. Solid helium batteries. Misspelled, maybe. This is probably why I didn't make it into the sequence. But I just love this idea. Galileo, personal magnetostellar rover, superconducting Kevlar composite lead disc. Like, immense. But it's also bringing in kind of a third layer to our running CD metaphor. It's a CD, it's a genetic disc, it's a mandala, it's also maybe a starship that connects you to the cosmos. I mean, these are appropriate ideas to have about the self. Contact 999, excellent. See, we've got like rep digits even, so it's it's extremely synced out, I would say. I'm not going to be able to sit here and think about every single image. I want to just close though by looking at this one. Don't break the future. This is the image that plays at the very end of the first song of that vision sequence, which is the title track. So at the end of the title track, Welcome to the Future, we get this image called Don't Break the Future. Well, for this, I really need to get my tablet. Because we are in proper sync century mode now. Because I really do feel that this is strange little premonition about 9/11. And the way that I demonstrate that is with my magical digital pen that allows me to indicate things of synchronic interest. If I can get the damn thing to pair, I wire it. Can I make that wire joke a second time? Is that appropriate? The weird thing about that last time was that I dropped in that clip of
the warning
Joe
Doc
talking
is
about the
rigging
wire.
to the tower. Marty tells Doc he
And
will understand the warning in 30
every time I
years.
said wire, it
30
like
years later, the
aligned
director
with
makes a
Joe
movie about
saying
rigging
wire.
a wire to the
Or that
tower.
happened like 3 times, or was it twice?
Warning within Marty's letter.
Well, the first thing to say about it is that we have 2 pyramidal volcanoes. Looks like what they are. So these kind of form a pair. This one is smoking. This one, I guess, has some smoke. But it's next to the sun. So there's a lot of bright, fiery energy there. In the background here, we have what looks to me like a fleet of airships. So that to me implies the idea of war. And it's interesting. I remember being cognizant of that when I played this game as a kid. First of all, I remember being very interested in and very perplexed by this image in particular. I didn't know why, of course. I just thought it was a very strange image because the elements in it are so precise and kind of a little less abstract than many of the other images we see in this particular collection of art. So anyway, I find that to be lightly matched. The smoke appears on this side, that's correct, and we have the sort of the fiery explosive energy on this side, also correct. Over here we have, again, twin pyramids. These ones marked by orbs. Kind of looks like maybe there's going to be a third pyramid here, but it's not so visible. And anyway, that sort of maps to the event as well, because there was a quote-unquote third pyramid, the Pentagon. So it was the third target. Anyway, we don't really see that one so much. We mainly see the twin pyramids, which appear here with something that for sure looks like some kind of airship now. Really, it's some kind of stylized impression of an airplane. Maybe it's meant to be an alien craft, or it's clearly some kind of a vehicle that flies through the air, and then this one's quite on fire. The overall visual look of this particular element really, really evokes to me a particular series of frames from Back to the Future, which, as we know, exists in connection with a ton of high-dimensional visual matches like this. I don't know. It's very, very similar to it, I think. I would say this comes together as another match. It's hard to say that the image as a whole is globally matched. I'd really like the airship to appear on this side, but I don't know that matters so much. The reason I'm comfortable IDing it as a match is there's kind of a few aspects to it. There's the image structure that we just analyzed, which I think is, it maps onto the 9/11 projection space quite nicely, I would say. Again, it's not the most perfect or impressive match I've ever seen, but it gets the main elements here. We have two instances of twin pyramids, plane on fire, a whole bunch of ships implying like an imminent war. This pair, the pair of volcanoes, is correctly handed. You see that this one has the smoke and the blue ships. This one is situated next to a red sky and the sun. So that all maps in a correctly handedly in the projection space. Even so, I would say overall in the image structure we have enough to ID it as a light match. But then we know some extra things about this image, right? We know that this image exists in the same, kind of amongst a set of images that appear to be drawing on deep unconscious image structures. It's as if that layer of the unconscious, which maybe was providing the structure for that piece, the bridge, that ends up getting these interesting ideas about opposite resolution at higher levels of context. That's kind of like self-referential information about some aspects of how the psyche works, like maybe a big central aspect of how it works. Certainly how the learning, how some things to do with learning and thinking seem to work. And so it's as if that layer of depth is the same layer that might be receiving these strange non-local transmissions from mass witnessed events in the future. The fact that this image exists in a sequence of images that contain other archetypal material and sort of individuation related material is something that's quite predictable. I think we even have the idea of a television here. This one almost anticipates the idea that this is going to be something we all see on TV, most of us. Then we also have this idea of kind of magnifying glasses. I guess that's what that is. Or maybe these are like pipes. It's kind of both. But so anyway, there's this kind of an emergent idea of like plumbing and the inspection of connections. This almost looks like a visualization of like a synchronicity web or something like that. Things kind of beneath the surface. It also might be cracks in a big sheet of ice. This says, "Don't break the future," which I find sort of strangely resonant with this read as well. So, don't break the future, don't break the ice, maybe. But there's at least an unconscious implication of a magnifying glass here. And so, the idea of inspection, and in a kind of a computer context, computer icon context, the idea of search is conveyed in this one as well. In other words, it kind of seems to anticipate that someone might be looking at this image through a magnifying glass for strange, subtle patterns someday. Which is just what we're now doing with it. So it's one of those matches that contains oddly self-referential kind of, or like kind of strange, like meta aspects in that way. Well, so I wonder what people think about that. My confidence in identifying this as a match has just a lot to do with how many of these matches I've seen. My intuition tells me that we have one. Well, so anyway, there's that interesting match. Let's return to the overworld and complete the game. This location is actually I believe it's called like Jim Morrison Cave or something like that. I'm not sure what the lore is behind that, but some actual place along this hiking trail, which is I think a ton of graffiti. So I don't think there's much left to do except to go check out the voyage. So here are some lyrics to the song we're about to get. There's Tut waiting for us in there. I always thought this looked like a big ear.
You have traveled wide to prepare for the voyage.
Every step upon
believe we basically see the Earth explode here. Yeah. This really upset me as a young adolescent. Seemed like such a strange, ambiguous ending to me. Now we're kind of running through the woods. Tut looks on ominously. The Earth has been destroyed. But then it's restored. We end with kind of a moment of planetary alignment. We can watch the voyage again, or we can watch the credits. Now, as I recall, I hacked my name into these credits somewhere. I don't remember exactly where. This weird communication thing. Restoration by Jordan Barty. There we go. And that's it. That's that game. The end. I really love that one. I think I've said pretty much all I have to say about it for now. I was glad to play it and get it kind of woven into the fabric of this channel. And please document the match that exists within it. I'm not sure what we'll do next. Oh goodness, I'm tired. It might be nice to play another game. Just the camera. It might be nice to play another game. It might be nice to play Zork Nemesis. On the other hand, it might be nice to get around to the Carpenter movies again, like I said I was going to do. I think I'm kind of back to the idea of trying to write a book about all this stuff, so a lot of my creative energy is now being directed in that, towards that area of the laboratory. I can't really think anymore. The game wipes me out. Yeah. I think I'm done making videos for tonight. Okay. Good night, everybody, and see you in the future. Bye.
I'm endlessly fighting a battle with people, you know, who want to throw the intellect out and think of nothing but the heart. And when you fight that battle, then you sound like an intellectual.
Yeah.
But when I meet intellectuals, I find myself fighting the opposite battle.
Different. Different battle.